Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the introduction and for the opportunity to be here today to talk to you about COVID-19 and children. I'm very excited to talk about this because a lot of things have been happening in the last 1 year and especially in the last 1 month. I'm going to talk about the clinical impact of COVID-19 on children, the collateral damage that the pandemic has brought, a little bit about the infodemic, and then lastly, COVID-19 vaccine, and just I will touch very lightly on variants as well, because I know people are interested to hear about that. So MISC is something called the multi-inflammatory syndrome in children, and in other countries, in Europe, it's called pediatric inflammatory multisystem syndrome. And this is essentially a syndrome that's been reported in the US, Europe, India, various other countries, not so much in Southeast Asia. And this happens in previously healthy children, slightly older, around the 10 age sort of range. And this happens about 1 month after they've recovered from COVID-19 infection. So when they have COVID-19 infection, about 1 month later, all the way up to 2, 3, 4, 5 months later, they can develop the syndrome where they come in very ill with fever, very lethargic, irritable, and primarily tummy problems. So they get diarrhea, vomiting, tummy pain, not so much coughing or blocked nose. And these children tend to be fairly sick, which means that more than half of them end up in intensive care. They get multi-organ failure, primarily involving the heart, and 2% of them will die from MISC. There was a small cohort at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London where they looked at a 6-month follow-up of these children. And actually at 6 months, many of these kids were still not fully recovered. So many of them still had fatigue and muscle weakness and still needed ongoing physiotherapy and rehab. So this is something that we have not seen in Singapore and not in Southeast Asia, but obviously Singapore has a very international population and we are on the lookout for this for children who have had COVID infection. The shadow pandemic, right? So the collateral damage that has happened as a result of COVID-19. And one of the large collateral damage areas is mental health. I think, first of all, the diagnosis of having the infection in itself is extremely stressful. Children will feel shame, they feel stigma, there's bullying. I had one teenager who had eggs thrown at her front door by her neighbors when they found out that she had COVID-19 infection. Her friends in school stopped talking to her. She was bullied. And people would cross the road when they saw her on one side of the road. And these were effects that happened very early on in her infection when she was still in hospital. She tried to stay off social media during her time in Singapore, in hospital, so that she wouldn't see all these comments that were going on from her friends. And it can really affect their self-esteem and their mood. When children are diagnosed with COVID-19, they are isolated for a long period of time. At the beginning of the pandemic, some children were isolated for 4 to 6 weeks. Now it's shorter, it's probably more around 3 weeks, but it is a very long, stressful time for them, during which time they have multiple swabs. The people that they see are all dressed in full PPE. They don't really get to touch anyone. There's very little direct contact, and it's very stressful for them. In Singapore, we saw the same thing. So in Singapore, there was a reduction in all the vaccination rates during circuit breaker last year. This was more obvious in the private clinics than the polyclinics, and then hospital had the least disruption. And this was most significant for MMR and MMR and chickenpox vaccines, which kind of ranged from sort of 25 to 73% in terms of the vaccine rates. And these unvaccinated children are obviously at risk of infection. Measles is likely to reappear when travel resumes. And if these unvaccinated children don't have catch-up vaccines, then the potential is that there may be a measles outbreak within Singapore. And why was vaccination disrupted? So they looked at the reasons, and actually number one was people were afraid of getting infected. So people didn't want to go to clinics, they didn't want to go to hospitals. They were also restricted because there were travel and movement restrictions. They were not able to access healthcare because the hospitals and the clinics said, well, come only if it's absolutely necessary. And of course, their priority changed, right? So their priority really was to stay away, don't get COVID. Let's not worry about the routine vaccinations yet. But to be honest, within Singapore, routine childhood immunization has always been an essential health service, even during circuit breaker. So I think this is now the time to think of our children. We have a lot of adult experience with vaccines from Singapore, other countries showing worldwide safety. There's real world efficacy in Israel and Qatar for the UK and South African variants. We do need more data on that, but generally the vaccine for variants may be slightly less effective to prevent infection, but will likely still prevent severe illness and death. And really, the fact that we see more variants just reflects the surge in our community cases, and that's something that we would like to avoid. All right, so I think we're all really hoping that we can move at some point from phase 3 to phase 4, and that will require everyone's cooperation and help to comply with all the measures as well as vaccination. So I would like to thank everybody for really being very good so far and very compliant in helping to get us there.
Besides the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a pandemic of fear. And as you heard from Dr. Chan, there's also info-pandemic or infodemic. So a friend from the World Health told me that if there are two pandemics running together, the word is actually syndemic, Syndemic, a syndemic, more than one pandemic. And this pandemic of fear today is, initially it was a pandemic of the virus, the fear of the virus. But now there's fear, as you read through the social media, the fear of the vaccines, the complications, the side effects. So all these memories are stored in a part of the brain called the hippocampus. It's a small part of the brain. You put a finger just above your head and starting on the top here, you touch a part of the brain called the hippocampus that stores in all your memory. And this part of the brain is near to a part of the brain called the limbic system that modulates your mood. So they feel very, very happy. The neuroscience of singing. You see that singing causes elation of our mood. But also this kind of music, singing itself, stir up the only memory, improves concentration. We'll talk about that in our research. But there's a surge of chemicals in our brain we call dopamine and oxytocin. And these chemicals itself lift up our mood and gives us a sense of well-being. You see in this brain scan called a PET scan, the red area is the area where there is increased glucose uptake. That means this part of the brain, which is the back of the brain, is working very hard now. So even if you're watching this webinar and you're looking at your laptop, your computer, and if you do a brain scan now, this part of the brain, the back of your brain will be lighting up because, in fact, my image, the image of the slide or image of the speakers is at the back of your brain. And so this part of the brain works very, very hard. So this brain here is the brain of someone with early dementia. So you see, although it's dementia, not all part of the brain has decayed or declined, but certain parts are still functioning quite well. So in music reminiscence, we often like to stir up the part of the brain to increase the glucose uptake and also increase the neuroplasticity, that they'll stir up more brain cells around here. So this is the basis of some of the research we are doing. There are a few other things that you must remember. I want to run through with you. The first thing is the new norm. You have heard from Dr. Chan also about the new norm, that we must acknowledge there is a change in our lifestyle now. And so you got to put on masks, social distancing, vaccination. The second point which Dr. Chan has emphasized on is the information. And we have so much things, we're inundated. And I'm glad it's the new word called infodemic now. And there's so much things, and sometimes they are wrong news or fake news. Someone asked me, which one do you look to? I still look to the Ministry of Health website and that particular person's side. I said, well, there may be a few missteps in the Ministry of Health website, but in general, they are good people down there. They are giving us information. And also important to have exercise, regular exercise. So you see this group of people, they belong to a Namas group, they gone off exercising, they put on masks. And this space here, below here, this beautiful picture, someone asked me, I gave a talk to some doctors, and they asked me, have you been to Switzerland recently? It's a beautiful picture. I said, no, this is in the Botanic Gardens. I took a picture of the Botanic Gardens. This picture was taken 40 years ago when I first came to work in Singapore in 1981. I went to the Botanic Garden and I at the crack of dawn, and there's a beautiful scene. It's not far from the rainforest. And fourthly, you must think of your diet. So if you have anxiety, you cannot sleep, don't go and drink alcohol, and it makes it worse because it affects your sleep architecture. In fact, it affects your sleep pattern. And in fact, last week, I have some students who asked me, can I prescribe some sleeping pill for them because they cannot sleep? And asked them why. They said, how come you're not sleeping well? They're, well, we're having our exams and we're going to study and been drinking about 4 or 5 cups of coffee at night. Obviously, you cannot sleep. So the diet is very, very important. And then some form of relaxation, we call it mindfulness practice. You're not too familiar with it, you can check the app called MindFi. MindFi. It's free, you can go into it. This is the important study because many people told me that, well, why should I do all this kind of relaxation, this mindfulness? What is about mindfulness? What is evidence-based? Now, the good news is we often hear a lot of bad news the last 2 years now. The good news is the Mind Science Center has published the first study in the world in which we have a brain scan of people doing mindfulness, for seniors doing mindfulness practice. And the person who introduced this is our late friend, Mr. Wee Sin To. And of course, number 6 is recreational activities. Singing is something you must do all the time. Gardening is a paper published by Angela Sia from NParks, and also art, also by Professor Mahendran from the National Mind Science Center. So all these things you can do. We have a friend in Australia called Mr. Ng Boon Yu. He's marooned or trapped in Sydney and cannot come back. And every morning he'll take the nice pictures of the sea, the seashore, the booming of the breakers in Sydney and send it to us. So photography is also interesting. And finally, most important, I think, is the social capital. Social capital are people who can take care of you when you are when you're very isolated. So these are the group of the Namas people. They form a group, they've been walking. Now they begin to care for one another in a pandemic. Some of the people in this group are widows and widowers, and others would ring them and say, can we buy the mask for you, or can I take the medicine for you? So there's a lot of community social connectedness, which I think is very, very important for everyone, I think. So it builds up a sense of compassion and a care for all of you.
It's so wonderful to see everyone today, and thank you so much for coming. I'm very excited to be sharing a little bit about singing today. And we just heard wonderful things about from Dr. Chan and Professor Kwa on the technical aspects of the situation right now in the world, and which has been brought great light to and been so informative to us. And so what I'd like to bring and share with you today is actually the artistic aspect to singing and why singing is so relevant to us, and what makes singing so special compared to any other art form. So I will be doing some physical movements as well. So just expect some to move a little bit today, but we are not going to be. I'm going to be trying my best to finish my slides today. Okay. So before we begin, I'd like to share with you the 4 things that we'll be talking about. Why singing, what aspects of singing help the most, so that you are aware of what to look out for when you are singing. And what do I do with my voice if for those who are singing for the first time, or who have no idea how to sing or how to start. These are some pointers, and also some future singing opportunities to explore. So riding on what Professor Kwa just said on the 7 habits, we will will also be giving you 7 habits of effective singers. And I'm going to be breezing through because I'm wary of time. So you might want to snap pictures of the slides if you would like to remember some of the points more. So in a nutshell, a bit about what I do for those who have not seen me before. I'm a conductor and composer, artistic director of Voices of Singapore, and my biggest passion in my life lies in bringing communities together. So a lot of the work that I do is centered around Voices of Singapore. We have many different groups, and I do a lot of lecture work around the region as well. At Voices of Singapore, we have professional and amateur groups, community, audition and non-audition groups. Everyone just comes together to sing because they love it. We also work with Professor Kwai, as he shared, on the dementia prevention, and these are some of our participants in red. And we have a choir for children with special needs called the Starlight Music Making Program. So with all these, every year we actually have a Voices of Singapore festival that we bring together 10,000 people from all walks of life at Chimes Hall in 3 days, and we just sing, and it's just the most amazing experience when everyone comes together to sing with no agenda, no competition, and just having fun. You might have seen some of our projects, Home Virtual Choir that we did last year during the circuit breaker, and also our spaces at Capitol Theatre where we have most of our rehearsals. So I'm going to go straight into the first topic, the first question: why singing? And I like to bring an artistic perspective to this with a quote that means everything to me. Singing can heal the wounds that medicine cannot touch. And this means so much to me because we sing when we are at periods of heightened emotion. We sing when we are at our lowest points. We sing when we are together with friends. We sing and we can feel this extra level of communication that transcends speech. Because songs are able to capture something that goes beyond what we would normally be able to articulate in our rational, logical minds. I would tell somebody to say, hey, don't fret, there is hope. Or I would sing the person a song. If I were to sing a song to the lyrics of somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. It makes no sense at all without the music. But with the sound of my voice, I'm able to pull emotions out that naturally create physical release of emotion. I'm going to demonstrate to you with this text. Somewhere over the rainbow, way up high, there's a land that I heard of once in a lullaby. The release of text and emotions really help to bring an extra level of imagination, hope, and motivation to the listener. And that is why singing really makes such a different messaging to the person who is listening to it and also to the person who is singing it. Now we go to the next topic: which aspects of singing help us the most, right? Which is it, the mouth, the nose, or is it the way I am moving? Or what is the actual aspect of singing that helps us the most? And I'm just going to pinpoint this to very specific 2 aspects. A key skill in singing is learning to focus on controlling your rate of breathing, and this activates part of the brain that are linked to emotion. So if everybody would join me to do this gesture, we're just going to relax by stretching upwards, and then we are going to make a sigh with just this in a nice light sound. Okay, so join me now and let's take a deep breath from your mouth and nose. Breathe in, stretch upwards as much as you can, and sigh. Very good. Let's do this one more time and breathe in and sigh. Now, for those who are singing for the first time, this sound that you make might feel very strange. It might feel like there is nothing to do with your speaking voice, but it actually releases a lot within you, and you can already feel that emotional release just by making the sound and breathing deeply into your body. So the sounds made by our voices actually allow freedom of emotions, which words cannot express. So I'd like to do another another example for you, where we were always looking to tomorrow for a brighter day, for to look towards the period of post-COVID. So I would say tomorrow, tomorrow, I love you, tomorrow, you're only a day away, right? In the most dramatic sense. But when I sing it, suddenly something very special appears on my face that is much more accessible and natural. And this is the song, the lyrics from the musical Annie. I'm going to sing that instead of say that to you. And I want you to realize what happens on my face. Tomorrow, tomorrow, I love ya. Tomorrow, we're only a day away. Okay, so naturally, the expressions and facial emotions, the body really feels a lot more connected to the sound, and therefore, emotions are being able to be released in a much more organic and natural sense, which speech and sharing thoughts will never be able to match up to. So when your mood is up, naturally, you strengthen your immune system and you respond to stress factors in a more positive way, and you enhance sleep patterns. Life is a song, so let's sing it together as a community. From all of us at VOS, thank you so much for attending our webinar. A huge thanks to Professor Kwa and also Dr. Chan. Thank you, everybody.